For the most part, business owners are familiar with property and liability insurance. When it comes to property, most of the things that are protected are fairly tangible. But when considering liability exposures, what are you actually protected for? Here are a couple of the most common exposures when it comes to commercial liability insurance. A commercial liability loss exposure is a condition or a situation that presents the possibility that an organization can be held responsible for financial or legal ramifications of an injury, harm, or damage to another party. Now, for today, we're going to focus on the 5 critical loss exposures that every business owner should be aware of and that they should confirm they have adequate protection via their property and liability policy to ensure that if they face any of these exposures, these consequences can be diminished due to the exposure's occurrence. So the first one we'll touch upon is premises liability, and this one's pretty straightforward for anyone who has a physical location for their business. This just means that if a third party, it could be a customer, is on your property and they trip and fall and get injured in any sort of way, you're exposed to the legal ramifications that result from that incident. Now, this is pretty common for, let's say, retailers or management companies for apartment complexes. Making sure that you have this premises liability coverage is essential. The next exposure is operational liability exposure. And this refers to, in the course of a project, another party being negatively affected by yourself or an employee throughout the course of operations. An easy example is, let's say, a contractor working on a home or other type of structure where they're above ground and perhaps while working, tools or other supplies accidentally fall towards the ground and strike somebody. This would present an operational loss exposure. The next one from there is your product liability exposure. And this one, pretty, again, self-explanatory. You want to make sure that if you're making anything or delivering something to a final consumer, that you have protection if that product is for some reason defective or has the potential to cause harm to somebody else if something goes wrong. This is a pretty essential coverage for manufacturers and distributors who have to shelve the responsibility to the consumer when using the product at the end stage of delivery. The next loss exposure is your completed operations, which again, this one similar to the product liability, however, it's a bit more of a different sort of final product. The completed operations is usually for a finite period of time project that has a end date, and the delivery is usually set for the customer, whether it be a commercial or a individual customer. Now, the easiest example for this one would be for a building where you're having a contractor install electrical wiring that perhaps after a month there is some sort of defect that causes a spark or a some sort of ignition that results in fire or destructive elements to the building itself. That person who installed the wiring will be held responsible. If that person works for you, you have this completed operations loss exposure. The number 5 exposure that everyone should be aware of, and probably is a little less obvious, is contractual liability loss exposure. And this happens anytime that an organization goes into a contract with another party or multiple other parties. If any of the parties involved in that contract determine that the organization, being your organization, for instance, is not fulfilling its obligations as described in that contract, and for any reason pursue you because of that, or back out of the contract because of that, and you are left at a loss of income, or you have to defend yourself against the other parties in that contract, you're exposed to this contractual liability. There are different types of consequences for all 5 of these exposures. At the end of the day, having to pay out damages that are awarded by a court, hiring a legal defense that can result in exorbitant fees committed by your business and yourself, and reputational harm depending on the nature of the loss. So you want to make sure you have the right protection. You want to make sure that you're aware of each one of these types of loss exposures. And if you don't have the proper coverage, make sure to reach out to us, make sure to reach out to your agent at least, and speak to them about obtaining the right sort of coverage. So feel free to reach out to us here at Joy Insurance. Our phone number is 845-342-4888. And you can also email me, liam@joyinsurance.com. Be happy to speak with you more about loss exposure for general liability. Thanks.